What does the future look like for BYU and Utah in the Big 12 together, or maybe somewhere else? If Kyle Whittingham retires, will they be more on a level playing field than they have been previously? We're talking about it in a crossover edition of Locked On Cougars and Locked On Utes.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? Welcome into Locked On Cougars with a crossover edition with Locked On Utes. That's JT Wistrcill. I'm Jay Katz, your resident BYU insider. Thank you for making Locked On Cougars and Locked On Utes your first listen of the day. Appreciate all of you who we like to call everydayers right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Now, FanDuel is here for you guys all summer long, giving you a booster bonus every single day. That's right. There's something for everybody every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com/locked on to get started today. All right, JT Wistrcill joining the program for a crossover edition. JT, let's start here. A lot of rumors involving Kyle Whittingham and his future with the Utah football program. Not that long ago, we got the official word that the coach in waiting clause is back in Morgan Scalley's contract. Give me a sense. What do you think the timeline is here for that transition to take place up at the U?
Always great to be with you, Jake. And I got to be honest, I really believe this is Kyle Whittingham's last year at Utah. And he hasn't come out and said that, but there's just so many puzzle pieces I feel like that are starting to get put together. He said he wouldn't coach past 65. He'll turn 65 in November. What else is it's a natural exit point? Cam Rising, who he's spoken so glowingly of, leader of this program. And it's not just Cam, right? It's Brant Keithy, it's Junior Tafuna, it's all these guys who have been with this Utah program since 2021. It's just like Utah this year, they were a preseason favorite to win the Big 12. Next year, they'll be far from that. It's a retooling kind of year for Utah. So does Kyle Whittingham want to be part of that when he's openly talking about retirement? I do believe there's something to be said too for someone like Kyle Whittingham, who likes to keep his cards close to the vest, being willing to go on Jim's Rome show and go, I'm day to day, and go out there and then talk about how, in Vegas, like, oh, I won't be here in 2027. When you're talking like that, I feel like there's a lot of smoke on this fire about this genuinely being his last dance. And I really believe it is going to be. And he's now helped Utah make the Big 12 transition, which I do think was a big thing, just having that, and helping Utah enter their new conference, which he will have done after this season.
Now, speaking from the BYU perspective, I know that most Cougar fans out there, he's been a thorn in the side of BYU fans forever because he's been so consistent and so good up at the U. If it is his final year at Utah this year, I think there will be Cougar fans that will celebrate. There'll be other Cougar fans who are like, wish him the best and happy trails on you go, because he is a BYU alumnus. We all know that. But the bigger thing, I think, JT, and I'll get your thought on this, is Kyle Whittingham steps down. I think that BYU is benefiting from their leap up to the Big 12 conference, especially when it comes to the recruiting side of things. But Utah has had a very decided advantage on BYU for years, especially recruiting in state. I think if Kyle Whittingham steps down, that's going to give a little more juice to BYU on the recruiting front. I'm not saying it's going to be 50-50 right down the middle. They'll kind of split the guys in this state. But I think Kyle stepping aside, even with Morgan being as consistent as he is at the U, I still think it'll give a shot in the arm to BYU recruiting-wise. What's your thought?
It's a great point. I mean, hey, BYU's already doing well recruiting. Top player in the state, safety out of Bountiful, is already committed to go to you guys, right?
You talk about Falatau Satuala, this past recruit?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So you guys already have the top recruit in the state, right? It feels like it's been a few years since that's been the case. That's where already just to jump up to the Big 12 has been able to help enhance recruiting from that standpoint. But you had hinted at, I think Morgan Scalley is the right choice. I think he's a good choice. And I think that Utah, I expect this transition to be more akin to Urban Meyer to Ryan Day, even though I know not people in Ohio State don't love Ryan Day. He's done a really good job up there. But then I can't recall, maybe like what Tennessee went through, right? There was a point at Tennessee way back when they were the gold standard in college football. They're clearly not that anymore, even if Josh Heupel's done fine there recently, and they had the one really good season a couple years ago. But with Morgan Scalley, I think it's going to go well, but there will be that step back a little bit because Kyle Whittingham at the helm of Utah is proven. And as much as I think Morgan Scalley will be a good head coach, he's not proven. So there's going to be that question of, hey, can you keep the culture the same? Will things stay the same, like just managing everyone's roles? Can you do that? I think you can, but he's got to go out there and prove it too. So I think that, as well as just as you mentioned, the Big 12, BYU's acclimation process to there as well, will put them more on even footing. I mean, Kalani Sitake, assuming he is the coach for the next several years, like he obviously has that experience factor on Morgan Scalley. So I definitely think, even if Kyle was staying, I think we're going to continue to see the recruiting slowly but surely even out in the state, because BYU is getting on this Big 12 level. And even though Utah's done really well, recruiting ranking wise, Utah's never dominated. You look at, yes, they've had a couple of years where they've been inside the top 25, but for the most part, that they've been a developmental school. It's not like they light up the recruiting rankings. So I do think we're going to see BYU continue to even out the recruiting rankings. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see how Morgan Scalley settles in as the next head coach of Utah whenever it happens.
Okay, so let's just hypothetically say that this is Kyle's final year, and I believe it. And this is from my perspective. I think there's a couple benchmarks that Kyle needs to meet if he is going to hang it up after the season. I think number one, win the Big 12, or at least have a pathway to the college football playoff. That's what you don't have to maybe necessarily win the Big 12, be at the that Big 12 championship game, win that championship game. I guess it would make you technically the champions and get into the playoff. I think if he accomplishes that, that would be a very, as you said, a very nice thing to kind of step off and say, okay, I finished out with Cam, Brant, Junior Tafun, all the guys that he's mentioned have grown with him in this program. But that makes the transition year 2 in the Big 12 to Morgan Scalley. And it's a whole new kind of world for Utah at that point. So as you kind of forecast ahead here for the Utes, you mentioned the fact that Kalani Sitake would have a head coaching advantage on Morgan Scalley. What are the chances that essentially we see what has been happening in this rivalry back and forth, that Morgan Scalley comes into the head coaching position and maybe plucks away some of BYU's assistants, and we just continue to kind of share assistants back and forth across this rivalry?
I think it's incredibly likely. I mean, it's just because of the connections. And the one thing I will say that makes it interesting when I say that is, yes, because of the connection, I think there will be some of that. Utah coaches stay. I mean, the continuity on the staff has been incredible. Think about how long Jim Harding's been here, and he feels like got a good chance to be the next offensive coordinator when Andy Ludwig hangs it up. Utah just is one of the places, and BYU similar to this in a lot of respects too, right? You promote within a lot of times. You don't hire outside of talent. And Utah, look, wide receiver coach Alvis Whitted, they brought in. He's done a good job here, but for the most part, like, Morgan will become the head coach. I would expect him to maybe call the defense. Just like I just think that might be hard for him to give up right away, but it's not going to be long until Sharif Shaw is doing that, in my opinion, because he's a guy who's more than qualified to be able to do that. So I do think we'll see maybe some staff adjustments, but because of the continuity that Utah has, I do expect it to or mostly remain the same outside of a few. But it's going to be, this rivalry is just going to be fascinating when it takes on its next chapter, right? Because like we touched on, when there is a coaching change, there's a potential it doesn't go well. So how is it going to work? Is this rivalry going to be more back and forth like it was back in the day during some stretches? Obviously, BYU won the last one, but before that, it had belonged to Utah mostly. So there is still a lot up in the air with this one, Jake. And I think it's exciting for the future because there's a lot that's going to change for Utah after this year in terms of their personnel. They've talked about getting more explosive. You got a guy like Isaac Wilson. He's not going to be content with handing the ball off 3 plays in a row most of the time, right? And that's not me saying he's going to be a diva. That's just any quarterback. They want to get out there and throw, especially one of that magnitude. So I'm really excited to see what the next chapter of Utah football looks like after this year, but got to be fired up for this year because there is a reason this team is the Big 12 favorite.
All right, so you talk about the rivalry. That's what we're going to get to next. We're going to get some thoughts on that because coming up November 9th, it's the first ever Big 12 a Holy War matchup. Looking forward to that one. It should be a really, really raucous affair. We'll dig more into that coming up momentarily right here on Locked On Cougars and Locked On Utes. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Now, FanDuel is here for you guys no matter what you're into when it comes to your sports. All summer long, it seems like things can drag a little bit, but FanDuel's here for you guys. You want to put an over-under on the amount of wins that either the Utes or the Cougars are going to have this fall in football. You think maybe BYU basketball can make a run at the national title under Kevin Young. You think that Craig Smith is going to surpass expectations with the running Utes. All of it is available to you guys with our friends over at FanDuel. And all summer long, they're hooking up all customers with a boost or bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everybody every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer right now. That's FanDuel.com to have some fun with our friends over at FanDuel. It's, of course, courtesy of your friends over at FanDuel. Once again, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Appreciate all of you for being with us. Want to remind you guys that Locked On Sports Today is here for you guys every single day, covering all the top sports stories of the day without all the shouting going on Fox Sports or ESPN. If you're having to turn on your volume when you're watching those other networks, make the switch today to Locked On Sports Today. It's available wherever you get your podcasts. It's also available on YouTube and the Amazon Free Fire TV channels app. It's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, continuing on here with JT in a crossover edition with Locked On Utes and Locked On Cougars. And JT, I think I speak for both of us and both of our respective fan bases when looking at November 9th. We're very excited for this to go down. The first time in well over a decade that the Utes and Cougars, the Holy War will have stakes on it, meaning there's Big 12 implications on that game. As we sit here in late July, looking ahead to early November, how are you feeling right now? You mentioned just a bit ago that BYU does have the win streak, if you want to call it that. It's just a one-game win streak, but they haven't lost in 1,700 days or something like that to the Utes, which is crazy to consider.
Good counting. There you go. Keep a track of it.
Well, there's a Twitter account I see that pops up on my timeline from time to time. It's somewhere, it might be almost 1,800 days. That shows you how little these programs have played of late, but I'm looking forward to this. The fact that this is back together and these two programs are going to be facing off. I know that there are fans out there who say that this rivalry needs to go away. Folks, you need it more than ever, it feels like.
College sports is fantastic because of rivalries. The passion, just everything around it is so electric. I think that's why we wanted this played on rivalry weekend, because we thought it belonged there. By the way, I'm not surprised that I didn't see the win streak, because my X algorithm doesn't exactly show me those kind of things that pop up. I try to avoid the bad memory of thinking about how long it's been like that, because that was my very first time I went to a Utah BYU game, and I got to see BYU smack Utah pretty good in that one. But I do think that, well, first of all, just having this rivalry back is the best. Like the back and forth between the fan bases. Yes, at times it goes over the top and gets toxic, but this is what's fun, is we are so close to each other. So you see Utah BYU fans all the time in public. Like, who do you support with? It's such a big battle in the state, something that brings us together, even though it divides us in terms of teams, but the entire state comes together to watch this game. It's something I'm incredibly excited for. And I got to believe these players are excited for too, because that 2021 team, they did lose to BYU. Now, I wonder if Cam Rising had started early on, would that game have been different? But maybe this team have to learn and come together. That's still a fair point too. So I got to imagine those players. I mean, Cam's openly said he wants this shot at BYU because he hasn't been able to. It's kind of the lone thing that, look at his resume. It's impeccable for a Utah quarterback, being back-to-back Pac-12 champs and some of the all-time numbers. He's been able to rise up the ranks because of what he's done, but doesn't have a win over BYU. And he made his feelings on BYU pretty clear at media day too, Jake.
Hey, when you go down there, by the way, I will forever thank Cam Rising for saying, I want to go down there and whoop their ass. Come on. That is absolute gold. And the best part about it is there's people fighting like, well, Cam, you're playing in Salt Lake City. Okay, regardless.
Yeah.
Cam has never had a true shot to go up against BYU. And this is not a kid who grew up in this state. He's from California. He played at Texas before arriving in Utah, but he has wholeheartedly embraced this rivalry. And I think both fan bases get behind it. I have Connor Pay on my podcast throughout the season, and he joined me last week to react to what Cam said. I said, I absolutely love it. That's exactly what I want to hear from him. This is a rivalry that is unlike many in the entire country. And I think that now that this rivalry is going to be part of the Big 12 rotation, I think it's the premier rivalry in the Big 12 period. I think with that sitting there, you're only going to see this get that much more national attention, and it should raise the stakes on it even more.
Absolutely should raise the stakes. And as we mentioned too, with BYU's program on an upward trajectory, because I do believe, yes, even if this year we'll see how it goes, I just think eventually being in the Big 12, I think we will continue to see them get back up. And I do expect this rivalry to even out. I don't expect Utah to either side to win like 8 of the next 9 or anything like that. I think it's going to be a lot of back and forth, because it's hard to win on the road in college football. That's one of the reasons I think it will be tough for BYU to come into Rice-Eccles Stadium, a place they don't lose very often. But rivalry games are also crazy and anything can happen. So I think that as we get more exciting chapters added to this rivalry, especially when it is a Big 12 matchup and in-conference matchup, I think that just adds to the intrigue and excitement of it. And hopefully nationally gets more respect it deserves too. Maybe that was the strategy for Brett Yormark putting this game on November 9th, where maybe they thought it could get more eyeballs rather than, yes, on rivalry weekend. We know this will not right now be viewed as one of the premier rivalries, but hopefully eventually this could be one of the rivalries that you close out rivalry weekend with late at night, a little Big 12 after dark to shout out the Pac-12 with the days like that, because I do think anytime these teams match up, because of that passion that exists on both sidelines, it makes for an electric atmosphere every time.
Well, and that's the other thing about this is a rivalry that it literally affects families in this state, because you have those house divided banners that seem to pop up all of us. It's legitimate in the state. You'll have a dad who attended Utah and a mom who attended BYU, and their kids have split loyalties depending on which parent they want to go. That's what I love about this. And I know that it has gotten toxic at times. I will acknowledge that, especially when we have such toxic discourse on social media platforms in this day and age across all spectrums. But the bigger point to be made here is, I think that with this being a part of the Big 12, it having stakes once again on the conference, and in case this year for BYU, I'll just say straight up, BYU has a chance to play spoiler for Utah this year. That's got to be what BYU is kind of looking at in this rivalry matchup. I think the Cougars, the goal this year, get to 6-6, show improvement, get to a bowl this year, and continue to build that way. Whereas Utah, they're carrying a massive target on their back, not just BYU. Everybody else in the conference wants to knock these guys off. So BYU's whole mentality coming into this is, we're going to play spoiler for Utah and we're going to knock them down a peg. Whereas Utah's like, okay, we just got to endure this, kind of make our way through it and just go game by game. Do you have any other mindset other than that for the Utes?
I think you're absolutely right for Utah. I mean, this number one, yes, you get the chance to beat and play your rivalry, but if it wasn't for the rivalry implications, we wouldn't talk about this game just because of the difference in the standings between the team. We'd probably view this one more to like, obviously Utah and Arizona State right now. It's not one that gets talked about as much, but one of the biggest things we say when it comes to Utah and BYU is it's a rivalry game. Just like last year, the Iron Bowl, we thought like, hey, Auburn doesn't have a shot just because it's the Iron Bowl. We'll see what happens. And it took an absolute Hail Mary and insane play for Alabama to barely be able to squeak that game out. So, it should be a game that Utah takes control of because, simply put, they are better. That's why they were picked as the preseason favorite. Every major college football outlet will have Utah ranked above BYU. But that doesn't mean anything when these two teams do square off on November 9th. That motivation for BYU is going to be there, especially if Utah is the one getting all the headlines at that point. And man, the opportunity to, even like as someone who, yes, BYU would be spoiling Utah stuff, but like just when I put myself in the mindset of like, I got a chance to spoil something special for my rival, that's all the motivation I need. I've often wondered and said before, Jake, like obviously there's nothing like getting a win at home. But when you can go into like your rival's house and silence that crowd, I mean, that's a powerful feeling, especially with what will be on the line for Utah. That's what I think is going to make that game so exciting, because Utah should be in the thick of the Big 12 title race. And I think they should make the Big 12 title and win it, obviously. But if you have a game where BYU is able to beat you, that cracks the door open for someone else to pop in. And I think that's what's going to make this one exciting, is the implication should be high when they match up on November 9th.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I'm looking forward to it. The whole thing is, I grew up with this rivalry in my life, and it had conference implications most of my life until 2011. So the fact that that's now back on the table, I'm on board. I'm excited for it. And there are going to be different motivations for both programs, but I'm going to quote our good friends over the Solid Verbal podcast. I listen to Ty and Dan all the time, and they have a very good saying: when rivals get together, toss those records out the window, because it's a different thing. All right. Speaking of the Big 12, JT, what is the Big 12 going to look like in maybe a year, 2, maybe 5 years time? We're going to try and make sense of that as we wrap up this edition, the crossover edition of Locked On Utes and Locked On Cougars, in just a moment. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars and Locked On Utes your first listen and or view of the day. I have to get used to saying view still, even though been on YouTube for quite a while now, JT. But thank you to all of you for tuning in. Hope you all are doing well out there. Now, the Big 12 is in a constant state of flux, it feels like, simply due to the fact that conference realignment continues to be an ongoing topic in this sport of college football that we all seem to be obsessed with, JT, when it comes to what we do on a daily basis with these podcasts. But the Big 12, there's a lot of rumors involving the ACC. Florida State and Clemson have filed lawsuits against their conference. The conference has countersued those two universities. There are strong rumors out there that Brett Yormark is trying to jailbreak those two, along with maybe a handful of other schools, to get them into the Big 12. Give me your sense. What do you ultimately think is going to transpire here? Do you think the ACC is going the way of the Pac-12?
Oh man, yes, I think to make the answer to the question simply, yes. I think, does the Big 12 get Clemson and Florida State? That's the one I'm like, man, if I had to put money on it, because I know Greg Sankey wants to go out here and be like, oh, we're not interested in expansion, but like, I believe him just as much as I could look back and believe Texas A&M's baseball coach before he ended up going down to Austin right away. Like, I just think that's where I just don't buy anything these commissioners say, because they're all just trying to save face, because then when it comes up and around, it's like, oh no, we'd love to add these guys because they're very good for our brand. But I think the ACC is in a lot of trouble once those biggest brands start to leave and they want out and see the potential to make more money and things of that nature. I just think that's where it gets really troublesome for them. How do you view it, Jake?
Well, I look at it as Brett Yormark, I think, is trying to essentially force the discourse nationally to go from being what we talk about the Big Two, speaking of the SEC and the Big Ten. He wants to make it the Big Three. And his way of doing that is maybe, he does take that private equity investment from that. I remember what the name of the private equity firm is that's based in Luxembourg. He brings that money in, and then essentially he tells Florida State and Clemson, and you can insert Pitt, Miami, Louisville, whatever other teams you think that the ACC you should pick up from the ACC for a Big 12 stand. Then you use that money to jailbreak them and get them into the conference and essentially force the discourse to be, okay, yes, it's the SEC. Yes, it's the Big 10. But guess what? This Big 12, they've got so many schools. They got so many just nationwide. They're a conference that goes from coast to coast. You cannot ignore them. I think that Brett Yormark is trying to do what he typically does and play chess when everybody else is playing checkers. Greg Sankey is saying that 16s are today, 16s are tomorrow. Okay, Greg, we don't believe that. But I think that Brett Yormark's trying to essentially run a ring around him and scoop up those power brands out of the ACC before the other two conferences can do that.
I agree. And it would be Clemson and Florida State. Was when you say those football brands and names, that's instant respect. We're talking about national champions. We're talking about college football playoff champions. And that's a distinction that can only be given to a couple of schools too. So I just think if you were to add Clemson, Florida State, you already have Utah, Oklahoma State, BYU, we think could eventually get back in that thing. Like, that's multiple schools that can make the college football playoff. And I know they want to just make this the Big 10 and SEC invitational, but schools like Clemson, Florida State, and even a couple of the brands that are already in the Big 12, they'll have a chance to make noise in it every year. Brands are still the biggest thing in college football, but you know what else helps too? Is the brands with that number ranking next to their name. Clemson is a team that can be in the top 10. Florida State lived in the top 10 last year, and had Jordan Travis not gotten hurt, probably would have been in the college football playoffs. So that's where adding schools of that caliber, I think, would be massive. I think it's a huge boost to the kind. Even someone like, I think some Utah fans could look at it and be like, oh, they could take away from us. Like, I mean, sure, but like, why would we run from that? Like, that's what it's about. I want to play the best. I loved playing Oregon and USC. Beating Oregon and USC helped elevate Utah's brand. They want to continue to elevate, beat Clemson and Florida State. Don't run away from those type of games. So I would love these two schools in particular, their addition. Or how about, you mentioned some of the other brands, like what if North Carolina got out? I mean, North Carolina basketball, if we had North Carolina, Kansas, and Houston, I mean, that doesn't sound fun for Utah to have to play them right now. But if you want to get up to that level, you got to beat the best. The best is in your conference.
Well, see, and that's the other thing about this is I think Brett Yormark, he's a hoop headed at heart, and any chance to get power brands in basketball for him, he's all about that. So yeah, if this does come to fruition, I could see him heavily considering the North Carolinas, the Virginias of the world because of their basketball prowess. And who knows, maybe
great TV market too. Both those that you mentioned too.
Yeah. Well, the other thing about it is he could go for 4 teams. He could go for 8 teams. He could jump this from 16 to 24 teams, and you could grab Pitt, which brings the backyard brawl back into the conference. You have between the Pitt Panthers, West Virginia, North Carolina, Virginia, Miami, Florida State. Like, you could do a lot of crazy things with potential realignment here and essentially leaving the ACC in your dust for good. And I look at this as Brett Yormark trying to circumvent everybody once again. Because remember, this time last year, remember how many people thought that the Pac-12 was not going to be around? Like 0 people, it felt like, but he pulled it off. So once again, I think that he is trying to go out there and essentially beat everybody to the punch. And if he pulls it off once again, you can't say anything other than Brett Yormark. He has got a vision for what he wants to accomplish as a conference commissioner, and he is executing it at a very high level.
Exactly. I will say I've been really impressed. Just, you go from Commissioner Koliakov, who tried his best. Not all of that was his fault, but obviously he made a lot of mistakes and wasn't able to keep the conference together. I have no questions right now about Commissioner Yormark. If something happens with super conferences, like, that's not on Commissioner Yormark. Like, Brett's done everything he can to try to build the Big 12, as you mentioned, to make it like the big 3 conferences, to try to put themselves in that position. Adding Clemson and Florida State would absolutely do that too. I don't love the name thing. Like, if we have to become the big all state or whatever, the 12 all state, I don't love that, but I understand. I can respect, even if I disagree, that he is trying to do everything in his power to elevate his schools so that they can compete with the Big Ten and the SEC. And that's where I do think that his aggressive mindset is a huge benefit, because while Greg Sankey is trying to just be politically correct, I don't think it's bad that he doesn't shy down. Brett Yormark does from the expansion talks. Because let's be real. Who doesn't want Florida State and Clemson? I know there's some rumors about that, but I just think those brands hold that power that anyone would be crazy not to want them. And sometimes, just like in recruiting, right? When you're the first one to show love and when you show the most love, you're able to get the commit. And obviously finances would play a part in that too. But maybe that would be able to help the Big 12 land, the Lions or just Giants, whatever you want to call them, Clemson and Florida State.
Well, and that's the other thing about it is it's Brett Yormark trying to secure the future for his conference, and I can respect what he's doing. Now, you talk about the potential rebranding of this conference name. There's one name that I can go with. They're going to go with All-State. If that's going to be the title sponsor, JT, there's only one way you can go in my mind. Just call it the All-State Conference, because it encompasses All-State, obviously, as the brand, but we've got teams all over the country and all states. There you go. Let's roll with that.
Really quick, I want to say this. Why are we keeping 12? There's not 12 teams in the conference. That's what we're attached to. Make it big, be whatever. Just don't. Why are we have to keep the number 12? It's not even 12.
Well, and I was at Big 12 Media Days last year when Brett talked about the fact that they were going to, over the next year, they were going to undergo a branding refresh. And I'm like, okay, that 12 has got to go. Why are you holding to that? Is it because of that XII logo? Okay, here's the deal. You can rebrand and recreate identities with a logo. That can happen overnight. I'm with you. The 12, holding on to that, I do not get that. Because if you're going to push this to 20 or maybe 24 teams, okay, we're going to be the Big 12 X2. I don't know what you're doing.
That would be a cool logo right there. If they added that, I feel like there's a way they could tweak that and make it into a cooler logo. Because I think the All-State 12 the All-State Conference makes a lot more sense than the All-State 12. We're in the same boat there.
All right. Well, JT, any final thoughts on anything that we've talked about today that you'd like to pass along to either of our fan bases?
I just think to hit on all 3 really quick. Like we said, do think this will be Kyle Whittingham's final year. Even if love him or hate him, we all watched him, as that one bowler said before he retired. I forgot the guy's name off the top of my head, but so enjoy it this year. Really excited for the matchup. As of course, look, this is I'm locked on Utes guy. I got the Utah stuff in the background. I think Utah's going to win, but I'm so fired up to have this game back for years to come. And I do think this is going to become a fierce rivalry and not a rivalry where what Utah and Colorado were supposed to be, where Utah just beat up on Colorado this year. I do think BYU is going to continue to elevate, and this will be a back and forth battle. And lastly, as long as it's not the All-State 12, I'm happy, man.
Hey, I think amen and amen. It should be a really, really fun lead up to that game. But obviously, just the lead up to the season. That's the best part. Is football is here. Everybody, get ready, because starting next week, JT, you and we're going to be in training camp mode. Here we go.
Crazy.
Yeah,
I can't believe it's actually here. Jake, always fun doing these with you. If you guys want more Utah content by chance, you can follow me at Locked On Utes on X, or my personal handle at JT Wistrcill. Jake, once again, always appreciate you making the time, man.
Absolutely. Please be sure to subscribe, rate, and review both of our podcasts. You can hate watch or hate view. We love that as well.
We know those of you do. We see you. We see you.
I've got a couple of Ute fans who comment every single day. I know. you are. But yeah, subscribe, rate, review, follow us on X or social media. I'm at Jacob C. Hatch or Locked On Cougars on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter as well. And until next time, have a great rest of your day. Once again, this has been the crossover edition of Locked On Utes and Locked On Cougars.